There we go. Okay, brilliant. So we're recording. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Aoife Kirk and I'm the project coordinator for connecting communities with peatlands. It's a Just Transition funded project led by the Community Wetlands Forum and Irish Rural Link. So we operate in 8 counties in the Midlands and we support community groups around those counties to engage with their bogs and to develop bog projects. And we've run a series like this before. We did that earlier last year. And the topic was very much focused on building your knowledge and understanding of bogs. And this series is kind of a little bit more on the action orientated side. So we get to look at some of the actions that communities are taking and hopefully inspire yourselves to take some actions locally as well. Yeah, so I think what we'll do is we'll get into it. We have 3 great speakers tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all 3 of them. We have Barry O'Loughlin from the Shanakyle Bog Restoration Group. We have Brian Gorman from ArtfulParks and Chris Ace from the Abbeyleix Bog Project. So we're going to hear first from Barry. So Barry, if you would like to share your screen with us, and from there we will go.
All right. Is that okay?
Yeah, I can see that
okay?
fine.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So good evening, everyone. My name is Barry O'Loughlin. I'm an ecologist, and I set up Shanakyle Bog Restoration Group with the landowner Catherine Nikira. So Shanakyle Bog is located just 5 kilometres north of Limerick City in County Clare, near Parteen, County Clare. And basically in early 2021, myself and Catherine, who I knew for many years, I carried out my master's project on Shanakyle in 2010. We decided that we would embark on a nature conservation project to enhance the peatland habitats of Shanakyle. My own background involved working in commercial consultancy, and then I worked for a number of years carrying out re-wetting of degraded peatlands in the Midlands region of Ireland. And so we, I suppose, started off then with the concept of trying to get funding to fund the project. And we were lucky in that we secured funding from the Department of Agriculture, a locally led EIP scheme, European Innovation Partnership Project, under the Rural Development Programme. So we secured €55,000 to carry out the work. And the main objectives were to restore 30 acres of raised bog habitat. So we had both the high bog and cutover, to create a wildlife pond, and manage 10 acres for wildflower meadow creation, species-rich grassland that would link in with the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan, to install bat roost boxes and bird nest boxes, particularly red listed bird species and amber listed bird species of conservation concern, eradicate invasive species such as rhododendron, Himalayan balsam, and giant hogweed, create a nature trail, and install signage and interpretation lecterns for educational resource. So as I mentioned, we secured €55,000. It was in response to Call 5, which is a farm and community biodiversity initiative announced by the Department of Agriculture, and we secured that funding in May 2021. And I suppose a lot of that, if you had any experience carrying out tender proposals, it basically was setting out how you're going to achieve a project plan, which we prepared and set out the deliverables. So it's broken down into your project plan, the objectives. We looked for quotations to inform our different costs from subcontractors. And then that informed then the scope of work as well, what we were going to do, the resources, the project team, and the risks and contingencies, such as potential bog sink, or at the time COVID-19, how that would delay the project. And then we came in with different kind of responses and how we would get around and work around those different risks, preparing risk registers, training, toolbox talks. And we set out our timelines and our milestones. And then we had a breakdown then of the cost involved in each different deliverable and how we would monitor those costs as well. So this is just a habitat management enhancement map of the works we carried out. So the purple area here highlighted in this section is the bog under Catherine Nikira's ownership, which was 30 acres. That's where the restoration rewetting work was concentrated. Then these little orange dots were where we were going to put in bird nest boxes, which is all bog woodland here. We are going to put in a wildlife pond in the semi-natural grassland, and then everything in the yellow boundary we were going to manage for species-rich grassland. And these little blue triangles are areas along mature oak tree lines where we're going to put in bat roost boxes. So these are just enhancement measures where we could maximize biodiversity where we could. Most of this area is surrounded by urban development and improved agricultural grassland, so it's a bit of a biodiversity hotspot. So we carried all this work and prepared it into a habitat management enhancement program and submitted that to the project sponsor. And then we had different biodiversity actions which we wish to achieve. So this is just an example habitat map. The first thing we did was the baseline surveys. We carried out the baseline ecology surveys in the summer of 2021. So these dark purple areas, these are the high bog. This is the high bog remnant. It's quite degraded. And a lot of the bog acrotellum, which is the main 50 centimeter surface of the bog, is degraded. You know, this bog has not been cut since the 1980s, so it's had time to heal. And you can see these kind of lighter pink areas, this is the cutover. So we're actually getting a lot of rewetting due to a breakdown of the drainage systems on the bog, on the cutover. But as a result, you can see all this green area. This is dense bracken and bog woodland. And so we're finding that a lot of the bog is drying out, while some areas are rewetting, other areas are drying out at an accelerated speed. So this is just a raised bog ecotope map, maps the different vegetation communities on the high bog. So this is marginal and face bank ecotope, shows degraded raised bog. Okay, so with no peat forming communities. And the idea is to try and get the sphagnum cover up over 40%, because at the moment in those high bog areas, it's less than 10%. And then this is just an example of the high bog. Again, 5 to 10% sphagnum cover. It's very degraded. You can see there's very little sphagnum moss, and you can see all the depressions and cutout in kind of indentions on the bog as a result of historical peat extraction. It was all hand cutting. So one of the first things I had to do was carry out plots, and I established plots to different areas across the entire bog complex. Even though we were concentrated on the western side, it was better off to do the whole bog together. So they just incorporated relevates using 4 meter by 4 meter quadrats to see what type of vegetation communities we were getting. And then we carried out larger quadrats. I would have carried this out. It would have been about 10 meters by 10 meters square quadrats. And these were concentrated then on where there was really good regeneration and peat forming communities over the previous 40 years, where a lot of the drainage network was breaking down. So this is just what's called a raised bog cutover habitat survey. It was done in line with Smith et al. 2020. Smith and Crowley, two scientists in the Midlands region who carried out a lot of work in raised bogs. And you can see on the cutover, the yellow bits are the areas that are re-wetting on their own accord. They're doing pretty well. Sphagnums are well over 40, 50%. The kind of pink areas are what's called the moderate sphagnum groups. And the sphagnum cover there is between 10 and 30%. And these lighter kind of blue areas here, this is where the sphagnum is less than 10%. So it's not doing so well. And that's because you get a lot of functional drainage ditches along the bog. And all these other areas here, this is all bog woodland and scrub that's invading the bog. So we want to see all these kind of moderate pink areas, the moderate areas in the low sphagnum groups, following rewetting, we want them to go yellow, get them over 50%. So I carried out a peatland restoration and raised bog ecotope and cutover habitat survey and documented all these findings before we carried out the restoration work in this report. And that's available on our website. So this is an example of active raised bog. So you can see all the colors jumping out at you. We're getting about 8 different bog sphagnum species. So the bog is doing really well. It's even up to 90% sphagnum cover, and it's difficult to comprehend how all of this was once bare peat. But you can see even the drain here. This is kind of a semi-functional drain. I mean, very little water is getting away. So it's a lot of the water coming off the bog is being intercepted because the drainage network is breaking down. So we want to replicate this on the degraded areas, which I showed you previously. So at the moment, there's less than 1% active raised bog remaining in Ireland. And this work at Shanakyle has added significance because we really don't have a lot of raised bogs in the west of Ireland. So its distribution is scarce enough. We mostly blanket bog in the west. So that was one of the aims as well of the project, to restore the Annex 1 active raised bog again. And at the moment, there's 2.3 hectares of high sphagnum group cover across the bog. So again, it's replicating that in the long term. And then we carried out part of the quadrat surveys. We needed to hit all 8 constant species to get an Annex 1 confirmation on the cutover over a 40-year period. And you need to get at least 4 of these species on the additional group. So all constant 8 species are required, which we were hitting, and we needed at least 4. So from the quadrats, we were hitting up on 5 of these indicator species. They're called positive indicator species. And so we confirmed that we have the habitat already there on the cutover. So this is just an example of the cutover or our bog, and it's this is a photo taken in 2000, and this is present. So you can see how the bog woodland is encroaching on the scrub over time, and that's because the functional drainage ditches are drying out the upper layers of the bog. It's oxidizing the peat, and it's causing the bog to dry out, and it makes it favorable for scrub and bracken to encroach, and gorse and birch. So blocking the drains would help stop that. So this is an example of a functional drain. It's carrying water away from a bog. And this is a semi-functional drain or reduced functional drainage system. In other words, the drainage is breaking down, but again, we just need to block those drains to make it non-functional, keep the water in the bog. This is just an area view of the high bog. Before we carried out the work, it's characterized by a series of wide channels, 8 meters to 12 meters. And these little depressions we used to our advantage because we put in the peat bunds. So it kind of formed like the peat bunds acted like a bridge. And so basically they held the water. The idea is that they hold the water in these little depressions, and we get to re-wet the bog. The other challenge we had was there's a steep gradient of greater than 1%. And the flatter the site, the better for peatland restoration, because you can manipulate those surface water levels to your advantage when it's flat. So we had to contend with this slight slope due to subsidence associated with former peat extraction. So we use LiDAR topographical maps. The red areas indicate low-lying areas of a bog, and then the green areas are the more elevated areas. So this had, we had topographical maps, and this helped plan where we would put the peat bunds, the peat dams, and overflow pipes to get the water levels back up on the bog surface. And so these green areas, this is just a design map of the restoration plan. The green areas represent the peat dams, the blue or the purple areas represent where we would put the peat bunds to hold the water. And then these kind of little triangles here represent the overflow pipes. So we have bunds here as well, and the cut over here. So the idea is that this is just the construction of one of the bunds. You excavate your channel about 50 centimeters deep. It's like having a foundation of a house. The idea is that you anchor the peat dam or the peat bund in place. So that's why we excavate 50 centimeters. We take the material over here in the red from the burrow pit. It's called like a donor area. And we take the underlying catatelan peat, which is the black stuff, and we build up the dam. But before we do that, we take the turves or the scraws, as we say at home in the West, we place them to one side. And the idea is then when we take out our catatelan peat, we use our scraws and we attach the top of the bund to keep it in place so the rain doesn't erode it. And so that's just part of Kevin, the digger driver. He's carrying out the construction of a peat bund. So the peat dam then is different. You cut in the drain, you create a kind of a little, with the excavator bucket, a little wide channel on either side of the drain. And that's kind of like a lock and key effect, so that you have kind of an anchorage on either side of the drainage ditch, so that the peat bund will anchor to the drain in place and won't be washed down through stormwater. And then we're building up our peat dam from the donor area. And eventually pack it down with the bucket, digger bucket, and then we patch it. The idea again, you can see the raised water there on the drain with the peat bund or peat dam, and then you're blocking the drain to re-wet the bog and then getting sphagnum back up again. You really want to get the sphagnum up to the surface as close as possible. So this is the high bog before we carried out the work in June 2021. And this is the high bog in, I think it's November there, it says 2021. So you can see the peat buns. This is the slope, remember? So the peat buns, we have kind of like a semicircle. So it's like a cascade effect. So it's holding the water no more than 20 centimeters. We don't want the water levels too deep because the sphagnum won't grow otherwise. And so this is just one way of successfully holding water on the high bog. This is May 2022, about 7 months later. It's still doing well, even during the hot summer we had. And then this is the submerged sphagnum. It's starting, or the submerged vascular plants, but you can see already the sphagnum cuspidatum, which is a pioneer sphagnum species which colonizes re-wetted and restored peatlands. It's the first kind of precursor plant species or moss species. And again, this is it again last September. It's doing really well. And we're getting a good distribution of that peat forming moss and those re-wetted pools. And this is the cutover in August 2021. This is in December. And the idea here is we've got a compartment with the buns. So you've got one bund here, another bund here. This is a compartment here and a compartment here. The water levels, again, 20 centimeters, no more deep. But the idea is that if the water levels do rise due to heavy rainfall, they're moving from one pipe into the chamber and out this pipe into the next chamber. So we're regulating the surface water levels so that we can get sphagnum establishment so they don't get too deep. Again, this is getting it close to the surface as possible. It's just taken from Mackin et al., which is a restoration guide that we followed as well. And this is Kevin working here. You can see the water levels here on the cutover are too deep. So we need to fix the pipe in place here and lower it down so that we can reduce the water levels because the sphagnum won't grow again. As I mentioned, it's too deep. So that's it then. After we lowered the water levels, then the fall and summer, you can see the effects there. That's going to be good for sphagnum generation. So again, this is our, if you remember, our cutover map. So we want all this section to go yellow. This is where we've concentrated the work. So these pink areas eventually will go into the high sphagnum groups in the long term. We'll monitor that through establishment of permanent quadrats we did in September. And so we'll monitor them every 5 years, and we'll repeat this survey from the baseline in 5 years' time again, and that will show how the work is progressing. And ideally in the short to medium term, we'd like to restore the eastern section of the bog as well. And we've worked with the neighbouring landowners on this as well, so that they understood what was happening every step of the way and explained the process, brought them out in the bog. And I think that's important that you need to do that, work with the neighbouring landowners. So again, we should see an estimated increase of 6 hectares of peat forming habitat. This is the bog in February 2022 from an area view. This is the high bog. So you can see it's holding all that water in the high bog. And then we're working with the University of Limerick. And again, it's just to carry out, you know, how the bog is sequestering carbon, especially carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide. But we're particularly interested in the methane and the carbon dioxide on the 40 years, the active raised bog after 40 years, because any re-wetting projects that have been done the past 10 years, which is pretty recent, or 15 years, and we know that we have a good couple of hectares in Shanakyle that's been re-wetting for 40 years. So that's going to give us an idea of what all these other similar projects are going to go in terms of their carbon emissions and methane emissions. So I suppose, again, the idea is you're going from a carbon source to a carbon sink, getting that bacteria, microbes in the soil that will start to sequester carbon through the sphagnum moss. And we've also carried out further collaboration with the local community and wildlife and farming groups. We carried out a heritage bog walk event with the connecting communities with peatlands in August. And we won the County Heritage Award for that bog walking talk. So that was a brilliant boost for County Clare and peatlands and promoting peatland conservation and restoration. So one of the other elements I mentioned was to create a wildlife pond. And so you can see here in the foreground, we excavated the pond in a semi-natural grassland habitat. and we constructed then a stone hibernacula for smooth newt. Okay, so we were a bit worried because even though there was a lot of clay and it was holding water, we just wanted to be sure that it would keep wet during the summer. So we put in a geoline in November 2021 just to act as a membrane so that we wouldn't lose any water. And then we backfilled the material with earthen material, held it down with heavy stone, and backfilled the material so that we try and get a natural substrate as much as possible. And then once we followed that, then we constructed the smooth there, hibernacula there. We transplanted reed mace just to give it a kickstart from a donor area. And that was in December 2021. And this is the pond last May, and even since then, you can see the reed mace is established, but it's even gotten more regenerating and propagating reed mace since then. So again, the idea here is to serve as a wildlife habitat for amphibians, maybe reed bunting, and potentially water rail down the line as well. It's just adding to the diversity of habitats with grassland, bog woodland, and the peatlands, and that's all good for wildlife. We also got rid of rhododendron and Himalayan balsam and giant hogweed, and so far there's been no regrowth of the giant hogweed or the rhododendron, but we're monitoring the Himalayan balsam. There was hand pulling involved, so we're continuing with that. We have mature oak tree lines along all sides of the site, and this is the bog woodland. It's dominated by birch and some oak as well. And we installed bird nest boxes then as well, over 30 of them for different species such as tree creeper, barnel, kestrel, great spotted woodpecker, and many other passerines, woodland passerines as well. So again, this is just adding to the diversity and offering enhancement opportunities for these species. And then bat roost boxes were concentrated on mature oak tree lines where, say, for example, fissures or crevices or cracks were divide on these tree structures. So again, that's offering enhancement opportunities for those species. And we commissioned a bat survey then last August, and they confirmed 5 species of bats. So one of the issues then was we had a lot of bracken on the wildflower meadow, so we needed to control that. And we'd lightly stocked with ponies, and basically we mowed it then in August 2021, and we've done it again in 2022. And again, that's setting the seed then in for the next previous growing season. So we've got lots of different wildflower species. That's Dactylorhiza fuchsi, common spotted orchid. We've got hawksbeard and red bartsia, etc. So again, it's linking in with the All-Ireland pollinator plan. And then the work is having a knock-on effect, which we worked with the Community Wetlands Forum. And basically, we made it onto the guidelines for communities managing local wetlands and peatlands. And so again, it's promoting restoration and rewetting in County Clare, where really these projects haven't really taken off in the ground the same way they have in the Midlands. And so we're hoping to carry out more work then through maybe native woodland conservation scheme as well, and enhance those opportunities for the bog woodland as well. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Thanks so much, Barry. Like, that's phenomenal what you guys are doing. Like, I've been down myself and I've seen it, and I've been blown away by the amount that's happened in a year. It's just incredible what you guys have done. I'm just going to open up for a couple of questions because Barry has to leave us a bit early, so we'll have about 5 minutes just if anyone wants to ask Barry any questions. You can pop them into the chat box, or you can use the raise your hand function, and then we can continue on to our next speaker. So if anyone wants to take the opportunity to get a question in before I do. I don't see anything there in the chat, so I suppose, Barry, from your perspective going forward now, because you've got so much of the bat roost boxes, you've got nesting boxes, like, do you guys have a plan around monitoring all of these species, doing like citizen science, maybe bringing the community in? Is that part of the plan going forward?
Well, our plan was never to open it up to the public, because we want to leave the bog. It is kind of a very secluded spot. It's almost like a secret garden almost, you know. Believe it or not, a lot of the locals don't even know it's there, you know, because there's a lot of an urban sprawl from Limerick City out into Parteen, you know, County Clare. We will we're working with Irish Wildlife branch, the Limerick branch, Irish Wildlife Trust. So they're carrying on monitoring of damselflies and dragonflies and lot invertebrate surveys. We're linking in with Birdwatch Ireland Limerick as well. So they're carrying the monitoring of the barn owl boxes. We're carrying on monitoring then of the bird nest boxes just last December. So we've confirmed occupancy there from the previous breeding season. So it's working. And we're also linking in with the Limerick Institute with the Limerick School of Art and Design, sorry. And they want to carry out a collaborative project, an art project with the environment and Shanakyle bogs. So we're doing that now this weekend. So I suppose really with the University of Limerick as well, looking at the carbon as well. So we're looking at from academic, we're trying to involve farmers, but we'll be doing selected talks throughout the year then as well, but we want to leave it for nature as much as possible, particularly during the breeding season, leave it to the birds as well,
Absolutely. We do have a question in the chat box from Federico. He says, amazing work, Barry. Lovely to see bog restoration and biodiversity taking place so fast. You mentioned N2O monitoring. Any idea about the trend of it in this short-term period after rewetting?
Well, most of the studies, and I'm not a climate scientist, but from reading up, a lot of the emphasis has been on the methane and the carbon dioxide. And I think that's where the emphasis is going to be. We do know from the EPA research study that they carried out on my Arwood bog over a 5-year period. It was David Wilson and Florence Renew Wilson and many others. That they carried out monitoring on a drain section of my Arwood bog, which is a board and one bog in County Galway, and a rewetted section. And so they found that over a 5-year period, the net carbon balance was that 1.75 hectares was being emitted, 1.57 hectares per hectare per year was being emitted from the drain section, whereas the rewetted section was taking in 0.78 hectares of carbon per hectare per year on the rewetted section. So, I mean, we know that the carbon dioxide emissions pretty quickly, definitely by year 1, it's sequestering, but there is a spike on methane levels, but that should, from trends that we know, that should die off the methane levels, but that's what we're hoping to do with Shanakyle, is to look at the methane. It's called a thing called methanotrophic bacteria, which works with the sphagnum dominated communities. And the idea is that it's releasing methane emissions. You can also get what's called aeronchema vegetation as well, like your Eriophyrum, your bog cottons. They tend to release carbon dioxide and methane really, or methane, not carbon dioxide. So again, nitrous oxide wasn't one of the main focuses. It is the carbon and the carbon dioxide and the methane.
Thanks, Barry. We have another question here. I'll take another question after this and then we can let Barry go. So this one's from Alison, and she's asking if there's a resident population of bats, and if so, which ones?
There's 5 species of bat. I think it's black bats there, common pipistrelle, soprano pipistrelle, long brown-eared bat, and I think it's whiskered. Bat is the other one. There's 5 of them, yeah. We don't have lesser horseshoe bat on site, which is kind of one of the, the Annex 2 bat species, which you get in Munster and West Connacht. And that's not one of them. Kind of hoped maybe there might be a population, but look, we can do more surveys. And I think that's something with the Irish Wildlife Trust and the bat conservation group in Limerick, bat conservation Ireland, we might link in with them and do more studies as well and see if they're taking up residency in the bat roost boxes as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Does anyone have any other questions for Barry before we let him go? I don't see anything coming into the chat if anyone wants to raise their hand. Okay, I think you're good to go, Barry, but if there are any other questions for Barry, you can pop them into the chat and I can send them on to him and we can try and get you an answer back. So thanks so much, Barry, for that. It's always great. It's always a pleasure to hear about Shanakyle bog. Okay, so I think what we'll do is then we will go on to our next speaker. is Brian Gorman. So I'm going to share my screen. I think I have Brian's presentation up. Actually, Brian, you said you wanted to
yeah, if I can just
you wanted to talk first. Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. Yes.
Go for it.
So we're good to go?
All good to go.
That's good. So good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Gorman, and I'm here this evening just to tell you about my bog restoration project called ArtfulParks. ArtfulParks is a cutaway bog restoration project owned and directed by myself. Just a little about myself. I've worked on bog for almost 3 decades, turf cutting, peat harvesting, and bog restoration. I've done some lake design and excavation as well. And in my spare time, I'm a sculptor. So it's with that on board, I came up with the plan for ArtfulParks. And up to this date, I've spent a lot of time working on new ideas to change the nature of my family's business and push it in the direction of bog restoration and ecotourism. But to still be able to use the peatlands, but in a more eco-friendly manner. ArtfulParks is currently being developed on my family's cutaway bog in County Offaly. To date, we have designed and excavated a small man-made lake, and even though it's at a very early stage, we have witnessed the returning of many bird species: black-headed gulls, swans, lapwings, kingfishers, tuft ducks, and so on. Like Aoife was saying, I have a small presentation at the end. I'll be able to show you some of the pictures of where we are and hopefully where we're headed. But the idea is to create a space to encourage biodiversity and a safe haven for wildlife, but also a place that can help artists and communities see peatlands in a different light. We have a large existing workshop on the site that we hope to turn into the ArtfulParks Artist Workshop. And it is here that I've spent time working on some of the sculptures that will be placed on the planned nature trails and some of the islands and lakes throughout the property. There's a small area towards the northern part of the site that is roughly around 20 acres, and it's still existing high bog, but it was previously drained back about 60 years ago. We put in attempts just to put in some peat dams by hand, but I'd say it's going to need machines now to do it correctly. But this would be the area that we have planned anyway for peat dams and peat bunds that have previously shown to be very successful on other sites. And just like what Barry has shown there as well, it was they're very successful done the right way. So that's that section of 20 acres. But the man-made lake spans across approximately about 6 acres. There were old turf cutting bog holes that will be shaped to make walking trails. The islands that will be on the lake then as well will have some sculptures with some heritage included in that. We will be trialing some floating sphagnum moss beds on part of the lake as well. So that'll be an interesting one to see if it'll work, but it takes a lot of work. But where the old spreading ground used for the turf cutting, roughly around 40 acres, we aim to dig cells very much like what Bornamona have done recently on a lot of the degraded peatlands. We will also be looking at transplanting sphagnum mosses from a nearby donor site. An estimated 1,300 peat dams will be required on the first phase of the drain blocking, and around 5,000 metres of bunding will be required also. Our main goal is to firstly restore the property, and afterwards we have plans in place to create a sculpture park with some cabins, maybe for rent, to promote ecotourism and biodiversity. All of this is going to require a lot of work, but I believe we can achieve a successful restoration project, all the while being able to continue our family business by way of restoration rather than peat extraction. It is both an exciting time and an anxious time for myself and my family, as we were looking forward to a new venture and finding new uses for our peatlands. Our wish and passion is to give back to the peatlands that helped to sustain our small family business for the last 3 generations. I would like to play the slideshow now, Aoife. I will be able to explain what we've done so far. Yeah, so this area here used to be an old silt pond, but we just shaped it slightly around to capture some of the water and hold it back and create this little pond area. And you can see that a lot of biodiversity has increased in that little area. But that small area is what we trialed first. But the local communities and everything started to get on board, looking away from turf cutting and looking at this as a way of leaving the bog behind ourselves. And it got people quite interested then. And I laid out some sculptures around this park that I haven't got the pictures there all together for, but it really gathered a lot of attention. And some of the sculptures there as well, we were looking at a lot of people were walking the bog at night and were very interested in what was going to take place on it. So we had come up with an idea for 3 separate sculptures: a vertical axis wind turbine sculpture, a solar panel sculpture, and a water wheel sculpture. And this will be able to generate the electricity for the nature trails and the lighting of that at night as well. It's you can move on to the next one now, please. So some of the bog oak sculpting then as well that I was talking about, that will be laid out across some of the nature trails and the forested areas on the outskirts of where the bog is. And we were looking at, the innovative ways to use our peatlands. A lot of families and people have been spending a lot of time down there recently and are all getting on board of what it is that we're doing. But they were asking about glamping, some glass domes as well. Astronomy is fantastic there at night too. There's an A-frame bird watching cabin there at the minute. Some people use that over the year. And then the energy efficient sculpture trail as well. This is the little cabin that we built as a little trial to see would it be of interest to people. We've got really good feedback on it. And as you can see, it's a very straightforward, simple thing, but it was built by hand. Hopefully we can continue to make a few more over the next couple of years. We've had a lot of scouts down doing a bit of camping over the last couple of seasons as well. We have sensory gardens planned and designed for one specific area of the bog on the nature trail. And then the lake then we have as well for bird watchers and botanists and families to come down and just enjoy. This is the man-made lake. Now it's at a very early stage, so these islands are starting to take root. And to the left of the lake is where we're going to try these floating sphagnum moss beds. We've had some whooper swan land over this season and to stay for a while and head on. But you can see already that a man-made lake, what it can bring back into the area. And they're just the swans. We've had a lot of stuff arrive, and it's great to take note of all this as we go along. Yes, this is the very first pond that we tried here as well that I was talking about at the start. It worked quite well. This is the man-made lake now with some of the islands that are left that will hold some of the sculptures. And this is the 20 acres to the northern part of the site where you can see that it needs some restoration. There's a lot of minor drains that have been put in, but areas of that we blocked by hand did actually show promising of sphagnum moss regrowth. Plenty of deer back as well. And we've taken in a lot of old Pordenone machines over the last few auctions that they've had as little bird watching spots as well, and just to pay homage to the heritage of what it was, that area. And that's our little pond and the start of the Artful Parks. So if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to ask.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was really lovely, and I love the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really lovely. I have so many questions to ask, but we'll go on to Chris, our next speaker, and then we'll come back and ask you both questions at the same time towards the end. I can see some questions coming in through the chat already. So thanks so much, Brian. And we'll go on to Chris, who is part of the Abbeyleix Bog project. And take it away, Chris, whenever you're ready. Chris, are you there? I think you're.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I should have unmuted myself first. That will help as well. Sorry, you can't keep me quiet for too long anyway. Anyway, so thanks for inviting me tonight. And thanks to Barry, he done a lot of the technical stuff, so I can just hop over some of the stuff quickly and tell you a little bit about Abbeyleix Bog. So I hope you can see that screen. All go. Okay. No. All right. So those of you who are not familiar with Abbeyleix Bog, this is basically just a view from the northern side to the southern end of it, with a railway track right through the middle. It's 200 acres. This is the bottom end of the town where you go to the road to Durrow, and you can actually see all the impact of the landscape and the drains and roads and paths and drains and all sort of different things, and also around it a lot of forestry that is going on. But let me start about the bog project. And before we signed the lease agreement in 2008, we basically, with part of the lease agreement, made provision for a technical advisory group, and we sort of convened the technical advisory group, and some of NPWS, Laois County Council, Board Namona, and also the IPCC, and some of the people involved with the Abbeyleix Bog project met. And there was an indication by National Parks and Wildlife Services at the time, Jim Ryan, while he was still working, he basically said he had some money left in his budget, and if we play correctly, we can actually do some drain blocking, and that's exactly why we met. But for that, we had to start with a sort of an interim or a draft management plan, and that was conceived in November of 2008, where we just got together and actually started to put a plan together for Abbeyleix Bog. And it's interesting, if I look back to over the last 15 odd years that since then, is that every time you make a plan and you work towards a plan, it actually focuses you. And this is one of the learning curves that we had. And the original plan, we still have in that plan, I have a copy in front of me that I'm reading, and it's the signing of the lease agreement to actually do our legal structure. An ecologist, Tim Ryle, to actually collate a comprehensive conservation management plan for the site. And the strategic objectives of it is still the same today. It's interesting. These objectives I've been to is basically the restoration of the site, is to develop the potential for research and education, and then also to maximize community involvement by the potential for recreation, environmental and social amenity. So that was the strategic objectives, and those strategic objectives are still applicable today with all the stuff that we do. All the actions we do in terms of that basically is based on those strategic objectives. That conservation management plan in 2015 had 108 different recommendations. And that recommendations was aimed at a community group who's going to do the work, and depending on our role and how much we know and we don't know. And it covered things like right from the raised bog, the cutover bog, the wet woodlands, insects, butterflies, birds, mammals, removing trees, walking routes, education, and I can go on and on and on. 108 recommendations. And depending on our resources and time and how many people are available and where we can get funding, we prioritize certain of these actions and we'll be able to implement them over the time. All right. But basically, so as time goes on and we got involved in the project and did events and we did surveys and we did all sort of start to do public open days and bio blitzes and educational trips and all sort of things, we started to learn a little bit more. And eventually, through the technical advisory group that we had, we started to dig deeper into what can be done. In 2009, then the drains were blocked, and interestingly enough, it was himself, Brian Gorman, who did the work at the time in 2009. As a young man, he blocked all the drains. 3,000 P dams were put in at the time. And subsequent to that, there was also an eco-hydrological and climate change study that was undertaken on both Clare bog and also Abbeyleix bog, that actually tested what is the net carbon emissions from different ecotopes on a bog. And Barry showed you a couple of the terminologies there, like your face bank, which is the worst, up to central, which is subcentral, which is basically active raised bog. And using that information, I'll show you later how we use that to actually make an estimation. The ecotopes, we basically with work by the technical advisory group gave us some pointers and say, do this, do that, or look at certain things that could be important for you in the future. And one of the things that we did on a regular basis is what they started off, Barry and them as well, to do an ecotope survey in 2009, which we as the community actually commissioned. And you can see the results here. And if you look at the color scheme here, which is the orange is the biggest part, which is, if you can see here, it's face bank, very dry. Blue is what you wanted, which is intact or good raised bog. And that was only 1.5%. The year the drains were blocked was 2009, 2014, 5 years later, you can see the immediate impact in hydrology, that the place is starting to get wetter. And you can see here from the legend here that the orange part has shrunk. And then if you look in 2020, you can see the major impact over 11 years that just re-wetting had on the raised bog or high bog area, that you now have 13.5%. And if just go back then to the study, PhD study was done, and we could use the information from the studies, we were able to then allocate each of these central areas in the years as to what the direct carbon emissions were, not the methane or any of the other greenhouse gases, but just direct CO2. And you can just see here the different percentages or hectares, basically, how much it was in the different years. And then if you look at the emissions tons of CO2 per year, you can actually see that how the CO2, if you look at the total, has reduced over the 11 years. So more than 50%. And that was just direct carbon emissions. The other thing we started to do then was to look at each of these hydrological. If I go back to this map here, the whole site was divided into hydrological zones. That means where that specific area gets its water from. Either it's from water flowing off the eskers, or it is from rain, like B and C, which is the raised bog areas. or like this mineral water flowing off on the sides, or a combination, or upwelling from water from springs or underground. We basically then commissioned ecological surveys of each of these areas to give us a good detailed overview of what is actually there. And based on that, in this map, you will see the orange area here is poor fen and flush, and there's a blue dot here, which is petrifying springs. So you're starting to identify very important areas that needs to be managed, or if you do any drain blocking or any management, that you don't impact on that. So that's been done for each of these hydrological areas. And out of that, then you could make then decisions as to the cutaway areas. And in this instance, you can see that we've started to do this year, based on a restoration plan that we've devised in the meantime for the cutaways, is 3 areas that could benefit from enhanced restoration with bunding, combination of bunding and peat dams. And the bunding is all these orange lines. Red dots here is overflow points, as Barry has shown you on his photographs. And then these other dots here is basically peat dams that fills in the drains. So a combination of the two. And these 3 areas were deemed quite of high importance, and that they will benefit from enhanced restoration. If you just look at the cost of if you look at just putting in peat dams, which is just blocking the drains, you would have the mathematical model was then that you would only have, say, a certain percentage, 0.5 hectares of peat forming habitat. If you do enhance restoration with these bunds, you might get up to 5.5. That's the mathematical model. So you have 10 times more peat forming habitats. And if you look then at the cost per hectare of peat forming habitat, it becomes then cost effective to do that. So just a quick couple of pictures in the last works that was done. Here you can see the bunds were just constructed. It was basically the week before the rain started. And here some of the bunds already started to accumulate water. They didn't even rain. It was quite dry that time. And then very quickly the next week, the machines left. The Tuesday, the Wednesday, it started to rain. That's basically how it looked 3 days later, that the water already starting to accumulate. In the process and all of this, we as a community has obviously learned a hell of a lot and built capacity amongst ourselves. And when you do restoration or you do any work, it's very important that you do some mapping or keep track of what's happening. Or if there is any mapping or any digital information or data, that at least you can use it and utilize it. So we went for training. We got funding from the Peatland Community Engagement Scheme to buy sub-zero accuracy GIS equipment, and we are able to with satellite receivers and stuff map things very accurately. And we've mapped each P dam that was done on the raised bog here. We've done all 3,000 of them, and here you can see some of the volunteers doing the mapping for us with the equipment. Okay, that is restoration work and going through over the last 11, 12 years. But a big part of this is that you have an infrastructure as well. And over the last 12 years, we've basically built an infrastructure. It's about 1.5 to 1.7 kilometers of infrastructure, either boardwalk or bog bridge or something. And also seats and using volunteers to build all of this. But then with COVID, these infrastructure started to take strain, and so we diverted some of the infrastructure and busy upgrading it as we speak at the moment. Here's just an outline of our infrastructure. You can see the hotel here. That's the railway track right through the middle. We have a boardwalk that goes right to the middle, another bog bridge to go to the other side. We had a bog bridge here for 400 kilometers that we took out and actually replaced it with a hardcore path. because there's orchid reach grassland that started to get trampled, and we needed to do something. We have another 200 meters of bog bridge here that we've just upgraded to 3 wide, another 500 meters here that we've just been upgraded the last couple of last 2-3 weeks. Here you can see people working in the last 2-3 weeks, upgrading, carrying in the stuff, making it 3 wide, and we're also going to have an additional new piece here, and eventually, hopefully next year, we'll finish up that part there. So infrastructure for recreation takes strain, so you have to look after that as well. So it's not only conservation in terms of restoration work. So if we just look at recreation and well-being, we did a survey in 2021 about visitor profile just on one day, which was about 580 people from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was in the middle of COVID, and people were starting to look for a place to go and walk. Now we have permanent counters up, and we've since St. Patrick's Day last year till the end of 2022, we've counted 44,000 people coming onto the site for just a walk on our infrastructure. So now we have a good idea what is going on the site. So having said all of this, all the work that's going on, and we do surveys, we do bat surveys, we do butterfly surveys, we do transects, we do all sort of different projects. We do a lot of vegetation management, we do invasive species eradication. But you can do none of these things unless you have good stakeholder collaboration. And I think this is just one of the big messages. First message is have a plan. Second message is monitor, have evidence base as much as you can. Get scientific evidence, do ecological surveys, inform yourself, and then stakeholder collaboration, absolutely important. We can't work without having the knowledge and the skills of other people, bringing them in and working with them, whether it is the local people in our group, which is engineers and teachers and people with legal skills and all sorts of different skills, to local county council, to local NGOs, to semi-state, state bodies. Everybody has fantastic skills that we tap into, and we take part in as much, and in that we learn from each other. There's a photograph of the waterlands who visited us last year in May, and some of the other projects that we do, but also socio-economic stuff. This infrastructure here has even been upgraded since. All these little huts here is gone now. There's a massive roof structure here that totally closed in with retracting roof and heaters inside. Nothing of these was there before COVID. Started off with a little coffee truck, and they've eventually, because of the number of people coming to walk, the one fed the other, and now this is a permanent infrastructure next to the bog. So the other thing is important, visual and performing arts. I think it is absolutely important that we use the visual arts and the performing arts to help with explaining our ideas and what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And it sometimes helps to reduce conflict, or possible help to enhance the message as well. Okay, I just ran through it. I know there could be a lot of questions. This is just a glimpse of the stuff we do. Do I have another minute or so?
Yeah, you can take one more minute, Chris.
Okay, I just want to show you something else, maybe just from a different perspective. Here's an interactive map. See all the drains. So to show you just the P dams that was put in, 6,000, 3,000 of them. We've mapped them, each of them, and if you look, there's the spacings. Then I show you then the drains in the areas on the outside, the cutaway areas. And with the bunds that was put in lately with the overflow points and the P dams that was associated with them, then you get an understanding is where we're working to. The next will to block the drains in between all of that with just P dams and start working away, and also some main drains all around in the area. And then if you then overlay your ecotopes on these things, then you will get a good idea. You start to integrate all your data for us, so you get a good picture of what is going on. Okay. All right.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, perfect. You've stopped sharing your screen. Thanks so much. That was really great overview. I know that there's so much more that you could probably talk for about an hour about Abbeyleix bog. But I think that was a really great overview. Okay, so we're going to go into the Q&A session. So if you guys have questions for Brian and Chris, pop them into the chat, or you can raise your hand. And then before then we leave, I have a couple of different bits of info for you. So if you can hang on that little bit longer after the Q&A, that would be great. So there's a couple of questions, Brian, if you're there, for you. One of the questions here is, whereabouts in Offaly is the restoration now? You can be as discreet or as you want.
It's just outside a place called, a little village called Geishel, in between Geishel and Mount Malach. It's a huge area of bog there. We only own a small amount, but there's roughly around 3,500 acres of bog that Pordenamona would have had. Would have been used to supply peat to the power stations. So it encompasses, it's right in the centre of many towns and villages: Cloneygown, Port Arlington, Geishel, Kilcavan, Mount Malach. So we're only on one small section. We're in talks to lease a larger section as well and incorporate that into ArtfulParks as well. So we'll see how that goes, but that's where we're at, outside of Geishel, in a place called Kilcavan.
Brilliant. There's also another quick question here. Someone has their Scouts hat on. They're asking if you have facilities, Brian, or do you do wild camping?
It'll be wild, yeah, it'll be wild camping, but at the moment it's not open to the public. It's still an active site, save for we're reducing stockpiles and stuff that's on the property, and then starting into the heavier restoration works. So yeah, it'll be, I'm hoping by summer of this year we will have moved on a lot further, but the wild camping will be something that'll be on the cards there. Yeah.
We have a question as well from Deirdre. She's saying that we have a surplus of wool in Ireland, and if either of you guys have ever tried wool paths in the area for short-term or longer-term use. Is that something you've ever looked into?
There was one of a local farmer that's actually not too, a short distance away from the bog. He had sent me on some information in relation to that. And absolutely, yeah, that would be of interest. Yeah.
We didn't. Most of our paths is on the periphery of the cutaway, so it is actually paths that was there, and it's already hardcore in it, and basically you have to dig then into that to basically lay any wool. If you go onto the raised bog areas, possibly it would be a very good option, or maybe when you go through drier areas. But no, we haven't tried it. I know where she's coming from. So
yeah, it's an interesting one. I've seen it done in another bog. I could be in Sligo, maybe Leitrim, maybe a blanket bog area, where they've done paths with wool. But I'm yet to see something like that on a raised bog. Yeah, I found both. Well, obviously, I found both your talks really interesting, even though I do know a fair bit about it, about both of what you're doing. I suppose Chris, you guys always kind of seem really planned and coordinated and put together. What kind of advice would you give? If you were even to look back on where you guys started, like what advice would you give to someone who's kind of maybe embarking on conservation project on a bog or restoration work?
Yeah, that's basically, when I was quoting from our initial plan that I had here right in front of me, was very basic actions, basic stuff, because we didn't know. I didn't know. I know nothing about bogs, to be quite honest, when we started off. We had the guidance of a lot of people. I mean, the likes of the IPCC, Jim Ryans, the Fernandos, the people from all the specialists, and even recently with hydrologists and people who has the knowledge. You can ask. If you don't know, ask. And if you have just somebody, and especially with us, our saving grace was that we had a technical advisory group right from the beginning. You didn't even have a plan yet. We didn't have an formalized structure, but we sort of started to look at what we want to achieve. And that is important. So once you know what you want to do, and you can then action that, and then you say, how are we going to get there? It's important then to say, okay, we need X structure, or we need X people, or we need this resources, or we need that amount of time. But like I said earlier, the things we've learned is have a plan. You can't work without a plan. And the fact that we've done a very comprehensive conservation management plan that took us for 5 years. And I was going through it the other day, all the 108 actions or recommendations. We've basically, bar maybe one or two small ones, like do spider surveys, we've done most of the stuff. And the stuff has become more complicated. And as we go on, it becomes more complicated, but you can deal with it as you go on. You learn from others, and you learn from each other, and you build capacity, and that's the only way. But stakeholders, capacity building, learn from each other, evidence-based, all of these things are important. You can't do anything without having evidence or understanding what you have before you embark on anything.
Thanks, Chris. Brian, like you were saying that, your family for 3 generations were working in like peat harvesting industry, and now you are looking still to be working with the bogs into the future in a different way. For you guys, where you are living locally as well, and the connection with the bog and the people living there, do you get many questions from people about what you're doing? And is there kind of more understanding and maybe curiosity from people where you're living about what you're up to?
Oh, absolutely. There's a few people like that. You can understand their viewpoint. Some of them would not want the bog to go back to being restored, but there's a lot of people that you can see it's a social outing for them. A lot of people that would have got turf off of us over the years would buy a row of turf just to spend the summer down there and walk around and be out in it. So because we've served that community for so long, we were just looking at going, we don't want to leave the bog. We would love to stay going at it. Only this is a better way of approaching it. And it'd be a great thing to leave behind yourself, that you've done best you can in restoring something that has given to a community. But when they see that the guys that were actually cutting the turf and extracting the peat, they're now on side wondering, right, well, where is this going? And it's only that they're asking for more information. And you try to give them what you can. You're learning this along the way as well. And you're just passing on what you're hearing from the likes of you guys as well, and Chris. And it's great to pass that on. But you can see where it doesn't just stop there. They go off, they research themselves, and they're coming back to you then with ideas as well. So it's great. There is a great community around there as well. And it'd be great to pay homage in some way to a place. And I think art, for me particular, that's where I would like to come in at it from. And it's just a place to escape for people. And it'd be just nice to have a nice, just to leave the place as best you can so that it can live on and it's not just forgotten about afterwards. On the fourth generation that comes along of Gormans, anyway, maybe it'll all be artists and poets and ecologists and everything else. But yeah, we'll see how it pans out in the future. But community are definitely on board now. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, that would be a nice thought, that we would have more artists and poets going around the place in the next generation. Guys, if you guys have any more questions for Chris and Brian, this is your last opportunity. So we're going to wrap up now in a minute. Chris or Brian, do you have anything that you'd like to add that maybe you didn't get to say in your presentation?
No, aside from just to watch the space, we'll see how we go from here. Things are getting very interesting for ourselves now. The man-made lake is almost done, so I'm starting on to the nature trails stuff. But obviously, I'll have to get a lot of data done as well. And like what Chris was explaining, there's a lot of stuff that I'll have to do now in relation to the studies and data and every move we make from here on out to see where it has been degraded and brought back, basically. So that's all from me anyway.
Thanks, Brian. Chris, do you have any final words before I give our good audience a little bit of extra information before I send them on their way?
Yeah, I might just say that's interesting that at the moment, as we speak, there's so much money available for this type of things. And even the peatland community engagement scheme has come a long way since they started about 4 years ago, I think it is. And they've listened to the communities, and what we were able to get money from them now to do that restoration work. And we will plow to help how would make it more easier, and that is one of the things that they've asked us to do, to help them to make it possible for community groups and landowners and people to access funding, and what needs to be put in place before they can do that. So we also looking at the moment with the stakeholders and with the engineers and hydrologists, and also with University of Aachen and the student to look at how to monitor all of these things. So, and that will be also monitoring from a community perspective, but right up to a professional perspective, just a framework. So all of these things starting to come into play. It's an exciting time for peatlands.
It really is. And funny that you should mention the amount of funding that's available. That was one thing that I was going to mention, is the Peatland Community Engagement Scheme. It's opening again very soon. Myself and Michal, our development officer with the Community Wetlands Forum, were in touch with the guys in National Parks and Wildlife, and they said that the scheme should be open from the 2nd of February, from World Wetlands Day. So if you want to pencil that into your diaries, it'll be up and running again for applications in and around the 2nd of February. So I just wanted to share that information with all of you that are at the meetings, I know, or at the webinar, as I know that, you know, a lot of you would have interest in that. From ourselves at the Community Wetlands Forum and the Connecting Communities with Peatlands project, we have a lot of various workshops and webinars coming up. The Community Wetlands Forum are hosting the very first of their wetlands webinar series next Thursday, the 2nd of February, to celebrate World Wetlands Day. And that'll be with Michal Callahan, who is my colleague. He'll be hosting, and he'll be joined by Garrod O'Wheel from Scohaboy Bog in County Tipperary. So that's going to be the very first webinar of the series, and it'll happen on the first Thursday of every month. So definitely don't miss out on that. And we have lots of different courses and other events coming up. Brian, you actually mentioned, you know, looking up at the skies on the bog. We'll be doing a night walk with Dark Sky Mayo in at Clare bog on the 20th of February. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. I really hope to see some familiar faces and new faces at these. I'm going to pop a link into the chat to the Community Wetlands Forum website, where we have a list of all the events that are coming up. So you can just click onto that link and you'll see all of those events. And if you have your own events that you want to promote within Ireland or online, you can add them to the event list yourself by just filling out a form on our website. So that's my plugging of various things done. I just want to thank you all for taking the time this evening, for joining us. I always enjoy doing these webinars, and I want to thank our speakers, Brian, Chris, and Barry, who has left us that bit early. But thank you so much, and have a lovely evening, everyone.
Same to you.
Bye all.
Thanks all.